Welcome to the Graduate School's Covid-19 podcast. My name is Laura Lane and I'm Head of Strategy and Operations in the Graduate School. I want to start by saying thank you to all of you who submitted your questions for the podcast. We had over 150 to consider. The purpose of the podcast today is to answer as many of your questions as we can. We're going to cover 3 sections. The first will be support for Masters and Research students. The second will be questions and queries relating to Master's students, and then we will move on to cover research student queries. I'm going to start by inviting the rest of the panel to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Debra Ogden. I'm the Acting Director of Student Services, and my role during the COVID crisis has been to ensure that the college continues to deliver specialist support services to students and making sure that staff can work remotely to be able to deliver those services.
Hi, my name is McCoy and I'm the Vice Dean for Education in the Faculty of Natural Sciences and a Professor of Statistics in the Department of Mathematics. My role has been to look at the education provision for current students due to the impacts of COVID-19.
Hello everyone, my name is Yun-Su. I'm Director of the Graduate School. I'm also a Professor of Biofluid Mechanics in the Department of Chemical Engineering. My role is to serve as a member of the College COVID-19 Research Group, which deals with research-related issues that arise as a result of the current situation, and these include the costed extension for PhD students.
Hi everyone, my name is Eleri and I'm the Head of Assessment Records within Registry. During this time, I've been a member of the college's Educational Support Subgroup, working alongside colleagues from across all faculties in developing appropriate guidance documentation for departments and for students on COVID-19 contingency plans, and specifically the impact on college policies and procedures.
Thank you, everybody. Before we start, I just want to make sure that students are clear that the information that we present to you today is valid as of today's date, so that's the 4th of May. I also wanted to say thank you to students who did raise questions for us around the impact of COVID-19 on student visas. We're not able to cover those today, but I have provided on this slide a link to the students' FAQ section on the International Student website, so please look there. There are a number of your questions and answers provided. Emma, before we start, I'd like to invite you to provide an opening statement.
Thanks. Well, I want to start just by saying that this has obviously been a really unprecedented experience for the whole of the university community, and I understand how difficult adapting to the impacts continues to be. What's critical to us is that we put student wellbeing really at the heart of our decision-making processes, and we take on board the impacts of COVID-19 in any policies that we put in place. We're really lucky at Imperial to have fantastic student union representation and have been pleased to see student reps are passing on your concerns so we can ensure that they're addressed. Hopefully this podcast will answer many of the questions that you've raised. There are still several questions that students have asked that we're not yet in a position to answer, and the college is still working hard to resolve these. I want to reassure you that we'll be updating you as soon as we can on those questions, and that will include answers to many questions around PhD funding issues.
Thank you, Emma. So now we'll move to our first section, which is student support for Masters and PhD students. And Debra, please could you tell us what students could do if they're starting to feel isolated?
Thanks, Laura. Well, it's completely understandable that you might be feeling isolated during this period. And it's important to take proactive steps to try and maintain a sense of normality. And you can do things like developing a daily routine, getting up and going to bed at the same time each day, and make sure that you factor in time for work, but also time to relax and to connect with friends or family. And connections don't have to depend on video calls, because I'm sure we're all up to our eyeballs in Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, but it could be as simple as playing a virtual board game or watching a movie at the same time as friends or family. You might also want to try and maintain a connection to your department and to the college. And the colleges, many departments are still offering weekly catch-ups or virtual tea and cake. And places like the chaplaincy are offering weekly mindfulness meditation sessions via Zoom. And the Counselling and Mental Health Advice Service are offering weekly drop-in groups to share the things that are troubling you and to talk with others about it.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. And what about if students are feeling like their productivity is declining?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's understandable if you're not able to get into your lab or your normal workspace that you might feel that your productivity has been affected, especially if you can't do the normal work that you'd normally be doing. So I think it's important to recognise that this is an exceptional situation and be compassionate and kind to yourself. But there are some steps that you can take to work on your productivity. So for example, you might want to look at booking in for a one-to-one tech training session that are being delivered through ICT. And there's also loads of really useful information on inclusive technology. And this has got information about productivity tools and software that you might find useful at this time when it comes to your work routines and getting back to a normal level of productivity. It's also a chance to identify things that might be related to your research and that you're interested in, but you've never had the chance or the time to do it. Focus on a couple of those things and perhaps spend some time doing those each week, and that will give you a sense of purpose and help to work towards your productivity.
Thank you, Deborah. And obviously I'm going to take the opportunity to share with students what the graduate school has available in order to support productivity at this moment. So we have dedicated one-to-one tuition with our team of tutoring staff. We also have extended our coaching program to both doctoral and master's students at this particular time. We've got some dedicated workshops available. So for master's students, we've got boosting your productivity and time management workshops. And for doctoral students, we've got thesis webinars available, and also a workshop on maintaining your motivation and building independence. And all of those are available through remote delivery at the moment. So I would encourage students, if you're worried about your productivity, engage with the training that's available at the time. So moving on now to think about what students should do if they're experiencing financial hardship.
Well, it's really important that they reach out and seek some information as soon as possible. You can contact the Student Financial Support Team, emailing student.funding@ic.ac.uk. And they've got lots of information about student support, and they can give tailored advice to your individual circumstances. There is a student support fund, and there's also a specific fund for laptop support if you need to purchase a new laptop because of the current circumstances. You should also speak to your academic department because there may be funds and support routes that you can access through your department.
Thank you, Deborah. And just finally, are there any other support services that you'd like to highlight to students at this time that you've not had a chance to?
So all of the student services that are offered at Imperial continue to be delivered remotely, and most of those services are also offering enhanced support in light of the COVID-19 crisis. So the careers team, for example, are offering all their usual one-to-one appointments online, but they also have some really useful information about what might be a priority at the moment because of the COVID crisis and what to do if you're affected by this in terms of your graduation or your work that you are planning to undertake in the future. So do go and have a look at the careers website because there's some very useful information specifically tailored to the current circumstances. I also just want to highlight the continued support of the Counselling and Mental Health Advice team. In addition to their usual one-to-one sessions and support, they are offering new drop-in support sessions that are facilitated by one of the team, and it will give you the chance to just talk about the things that are worrying you in a safe and supported space. And you can sign up to those on the Counselling and Mental Health Advice website. Other services continue, including the chaplaincy, and they're running sessions online for meditation and mindfulness, and can offer one-to-one support services to any student and not just on a faith basis. So anybody can contact the chaplaincy for a one-to-one chat or for some mindfulness meditation. Disability Advisory Service continue to offer their support, and obviously with the exams being remote this year, it might be appropriate for students to get in contact with them and talk about any difficulties they're experiencing or any additional support that they might need. That basically sums up the services that we're offering, but you can always check out the Student Support Zone website, which has lots of useful information, both related to the COVID-19 situation, but also for general support information for all students.
Thanks very much, Deborah. Eleri, please can you tell us how students can make the college aware of their current situation?
Of course. So all students are encouraged to log into My Imperial, where they will now see a COVID-19 tile on which they can click on to make the college aware of their current circumstances with regards to COVID-19 in particular. So whether or not they have a confirmed or suspected case, whether they are currently self-isolating, or whether there's been any contact with others who have confirmed cases. So this information is obviously going to be managed in confidence, but it's really to allow the college to monitor the current situation about how students are affected, and in future can obviously then be used to evidence any need for extensions based on the impact that it has had on them. So we'd just like to encourage students to log in and engage with us via that platform as much as they're able to.
Thanks, Eleri. So we'll now move on to look at support for master's students. And Emma, what are the key messages that you would like to share with master's students with respect to their modules and projects which may have been affected by COVID-19?
All departments have been working really hard on their remote alternatives, both for the taught modules and for projects. I think what's been key for us is to ensure that students are able to meet intended learning outcomes of their courses and programmes. And for programmes with more theoretical projects, the shift has been relatively straightforward, though of course we have to take on board that students will be affected for other reasons because of the impacts of COVID-19. And it's clear that those with lab-based projects and modules, it's been much more of a challenge, but where possible, departments have moved to, for example, literature-based projects or projects that make use of existing lab-based results. And I've been really encouraged to see some really innovative alternatives to traditional face-to-face teaching. There are still cases where we have some programs that cannot meet the learning outcomes or can't deliver their modules remotely, and this does vary by department and by program. And in those cases, we're looking at delaying delivery to a time when we can provide the learning required for that particular program. If this is the case, you should have already received or will receive very shortly this information from your departments.
Thank you, Emma. And students commented it when we asked them whether they would receive a reduction in their tuition fees as a result of changes being made to their programme or their overall experience at college.
Obviously, we understand that these changes have been quite a challenge for students, but the current college position is that our aim is for our students to complete their studies and gain the skills that their programmes are intended to deliver. Where this can happen and where students will graduate with the degrees that they've paid for, then we will not be offering a refund. This is in line with current government policy as outlined by the university ministers. In cases where we're unable to deliver a programme remotely, your department will be able to advise you how they intend to make provisions so that you can complete your programme. Obviously, the experience has changed for the whole college community, and staff are working hard to deliver not only the educational elements of our degrees, but also provisions for our student support services, as has already been outlined by Laura and Deborah.
Thank you. And now thinking about students who are concerned that they are going to miss out on gaining valuable lab experience, especially when when they may have chosen a master's programme, particularly for this reason. So my question is, when the college reopens, will there be opportunity for students to gain missed lab experience, even if they've completed an alternative theoretically based project while the college has been closed?
We've recently published guidelines, or it's being published today, guidelines for our policy on postgraduate taught registration, and decisions for specific programmes are being made at a departmental level. You should have already heard from your department, or should hear very soon, about the decisions that they are making in regards to registration, and this will vary by programme.
Thank you. And then a question around the safety net. What is it, and will one be put in place for master's
So for those
students?
of you that haven't seen, we have introduced a safety net for our undergraduate programmes, just to ensure that students' degree average is not negatively impacted by COVID-19. Effectively, the safety net is calculated using marks for assessments completed before the college closed. Now, on the PGT side, we are asking that departments consider using alternative mechanisms for their taught masters courses. Obviously, this will vary by programme, and programme directors will be able to advise you of how they intend to implement a safety net. And
finally, Emma, what grades are going to appear on student transcripts?
This is one of those questions that we're not yet in a position to answer on transcripts. No final decisions have yet been made, and we're involving the union, the Imperial College Union sabbatical officers as part of the group that's making these decisions. So do feed any views that you may have via your student rep network.
Thank you, Emma. And now let's move on to talk now about research students who are in their final year. Eleri, could you please explain what process students should follow in order to extend their PhD registration with the college?
Yes, of course. So the college already has a procedure in place to allow students affected by circumstances beyond their control to apply for an extension to their thesis submission deadline and their registration with the college. So this procedure still very much applies in the current situation, especially for final year students who are affected by COVID-19, whether that be due to their own illness or caring responsibilities for others perhaps. As part of this process, students will need to liaise with their supervisor and complete a late case request form in which they should clarify the reasons why their current deadline cannot be met and propose an achievable future deadline supported by a summary of their work plan as agreed by their supervisor and their Director of Postgraduate Studies. The request will subsequently be submitted by the Students Department to the Registry Assessment Records team for processing, and depending on the length and the reason for that particular extension request, may also be subject to graduate school review. However, I would also just like to take this opportunity to stress that this process is in place to support students who've been affected by circumstances beyond their control. So there shouldn't be any concern about needing to initiate this process by students, especially in light of the current situation. So the advice to students is to liaise with their supervisors as soon as possible if they do have any concerns about meeting that deadline in order to initiate this process to get the extensions that they need.
Thank you, Eleri. And now thinking about the requirements for PhD vivas, are they going to be modified in any way to accommodate for the possibility of not being able to go back into the lab?
Absolutely. So in terms of, are you asking about vivas taking place remotely? Yeah, so
yeah,
I mean,
that as well, Eleri.
Taking place remotely, certainly the college has agreed that this is something that the college will support during this particular period, so to not delay progression and award for those in the final stages of their programme. So the college has set out clear conditions for holding viva examinations remotely, which includes explicit confirmation from all parties, including the candidate themselves, that they're happy to proceed with a remote examination. Candidates are then also required to display their college ID card at the start of the examination and are expected to conform to usual examination conditions, so no third-party support, for example. Then, as per the usual process, the candidate's supervisor or departmental nominee will arrange a convenient time and date for the viva, allowing for any time zone challenges and clarify any technical requirements. So the college's recommended software for audio and video meetings is Microsoft Teams. So it's expected that remote vivas will be conducted via that platform. And we'd encourage candidates and those acting as examiners to familiarise with that software ahead of the viva examination. As per the usual process, candidates will then be made aware by the panel of the result outcome, and written confirmation of the result outcome will then be sent to candidates within around 2 weeks of the viva exam taking place. The viva can be delayed if necessary until such a time that the college can support an in-person viva examination again. However, candidates should note that this will have an obvious impact on their progression and final award. So again, any concerns, candidates should discuss with their supervisor at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you. And Yun, we had a lot of questions about extensions to stipends. Are we in a position to be able to give students any information about that today?
Thanks, Laura. The college is working on finalizing its policies with regard to the extension to stipends. We should be able to communicate this information in the next few days.
That's great. Thank you, Yun. So now moving to research students in the earlier years of their PhDs. And the question is, what is the timescale for the college to issue some guidance on the impact of COVID-19 on ESAs and LSRs? And perhaps, Emma, if I could ask you that question.
I want to start by reiterating Eleri's point that we're really committed to ensuring that we mitigate the impact on students' progress, but also recognising that each student is going to be affected differently. The default position is that deadlines can be moved if a student's research has been impacted, and that's going to be subject to departmental approval. So do contact your supervisor and your department to ensure that those deadlines can be moved. Registries already published general guidance to departments on the registration status of students during the outbreak, and this covers extending milestones where necessary.
Thank you. And are milestones being carried out remotely?
Yeah, there is provision to carry out remotely, as Eleri has already highlighted for the vivas. We can also carry those out remotely where that's appropriate. I think that if many students are able to continue their research remotely, and we are encouraging PhD students to keep their PhDs on track and meet original deadlines. So while we're not automatically extending deadlines, we will, of course, extend in any situation where the research has been impacted by the current situation. Your departments will be able to make provisions in order for you to mitigate the impact. In the case where research can't continue, if yours is a lab-based PhD, then departments will be extending deadlines as required. Our current advice is not to interrupt your studies, but to use extensions instead.
That's great. And Eleri, just to bring you in there, is there any formal paperwork that students need to complete in order to apply for their milestones extension?
So as Emma mentioned, we will support milestone extensions for all students when necessary, and in particular those students affected by lab closures or the closure of specialist research facilities, meaning that students cannot progress at the expected rate in any other normal situation. For those students affected, assessment milestones will be extended by the full closure period, and that extension length will be determined upon the reopening of these sites in consultation with the candidate's department. So the Registry Student Records and Assessment Records team will liaise with department contacts directly with regards to this, and as such there's no formal paperwork for students to complete in order for milestone extensions to then be granted. Students who are able to complete milestones through remote working are of course encouraged to do so. However, during this time, the Assessment Records team will not be actively following up with departments on any missed assessment milestones in light of the situation. So again, just to reiterate Emma's point, any students concerned about meeting particular assessment deadlines should liaise with their supervisor and, as much as is possible, agree on a revised work plan in light of this current situation.
Emma, where students have already had their abstracts accepted for conferences and the conferences have been postponed for this year, will funding from supervisors be rolled over to support conference attendance next year?
I think we would certainly hope that in the majority of cases such support would be rolled over. But the first thing you should do is really speak to your supervisor, as there may be some other restrictions on the funding that could impact such support. But it's certainly our intention that such funding would be rolled over.
So I'd like to thank our panel for today, and to thank students as well for sharing their concerns with us. We hope that it's been useful for everybody. And that concludes the podcast for today.